It's now early October and you can see the first tinges of color starting on the trees, which means impending cold, which means wood burning, which means log splitting. Specifically in the case of this video, little stuff just to get my fire started. And here is my little hatchet. Guess where it came from? It was included free in the price of this house. I found it back there in the weeds behind the wood pile and scrap metal, which wasn't so presentable about 2 weeks ago. But hey, I can't complain, it was free. No, I underestimated the usefulness of it at first. I didn't find it in this shape. I made it into a project. It was completely rusted from head to toe, so I started to work on the edge and I used a grinder first. This kind of grinder, with this kind of head. But that's not really the subject of this video. Go watch Wrangler Star's video if you want to see how he put an edge on this. It was a 3-step process. He started with a belt sander, and the second part was a flat stone where he wetstoned it, and then the third part he dragged it across a 2x4 that had some compound on it. Go watch, it's useful. But this video instead is focusing on the other aspect of it, which was his major complaint, the handle. The vibration or the shock that you get from a steel tube for a handle. I don't know much about axes, but I do know a lot about hammers. I was born and raised with a framing hammer, and I didn't even use a pneumatic fastener until I was into my 20s. So of course the Est-Wing style, this is an Est-Wing knockoff, I love it just as much as the Est-Wing, is an extremely popular option, but as Wrangler Star mentions, correctly so, it's not popular with framers who have to do it all day. It just has an uncomfortable feel to always bang metal on metal without some sort of shock absorption. That's where the wooden handle comes in. For general purposes though, I would much prefer the Est-Wing style to a wooden handle, because they're clunky. That's why for small amounts of work, this is probably better than one of those fancy wooden handle axes. Further, as evinced by this case, you can leave it out behind the wood pile for 2 years and then still restore it. Why would I go through the trouble though? Because I didn't think it was a priority. And since it was already here, it only took me a minute to put an edge on it, and then I tumbled down the rabbit hole and started cleaning it up. I got all the rust off of it and even gave it this flat black paint job. But I'm going to take it even further in this video by giving it some heft, because its balance is off. I don't like that. I like the balance to not be so much in the head. It's just because of my personal preference and because I'm used to a steel shaft hammer. It's just for the way that it flows in your hand, I suppose. Watch this footage. So you are watching my second channel right now, but on my first channel I used BBs and epoxy to make a nice concoction of liquidy metal goo, and I thought that would be a wonderful way to fill this hollow handle to give it a little bit more mass. And hopefully it will attenuate some of the vibration. The reason that I even know that it's a hollow tube is because of this. When I found it in the woods, there was just a metal pipe or tube sticking out of the end of this, which was really uncomfortable because this is how I typically swing it. So I repaired this with some shredded rubber and epoxy. But now, having seen that this actually works, I'm going to rip that back off, fill this full of my BB stuff, and then repair it again. So it's an epoxy project, and hopefully when it's done, this will be worth more than $10. At least it will be in labor.
The idea behind a labor theory of value is that a commodity is worth how much work gets put into it. Like, a commodity is like coffee or corn. So depending on how much work is invested into the commodity determines how much it's worth. Like a lot of ideas in economics, it's beautiful and it makes you think, but it might not be the best way to explain what's going on, because supply and demand kind of supersedes labor theories of value. For example, no matter how much trouble I put into this, it doesn't mean that there's enough demand that somebody's going to pay me $100 for it. It's still just a $10 piece of crap.
Wow, this epoxy rubber stuff is tougher than I would have guessed. It does a pretty good job of imitating the original handle. I'll show you how to do that later on when we're all done, but right now I have to get to this pipe. Maybe the epoxy rubber handle works too well. It's way stronger than I would have guessed. There we go. That will be plenty of room to stuff BBs down into. Wait, a quick note on the S-Wing. Here is the 16-ounce S-Wing impersonator. It's trying to be the 16-ounce S-Wing. Over the course of my usage of the S-Wing, you can tell by the end knobs which ones I prefer. This 22 ounce is a close second, but if you're only going to have one hammer, have the 16-ounce S-Wing. It's a must-own tool. If I was stuck on an island, this is the thing that I would want to take with me. Why are these so popular? Because now, even with framing carpenters, because of pneumatic fasteners, a hammer is kind of secondary and it becomes more of a pry tool and less of a nail driving tool. So it's pretty much replaced the wood handle hammer for a framer now. If you are driving spikes framing, a wood handle is still probably your preferred weapon. And if you are using one of those fancy death sticks or some other new design, that's probably just inexperience.
You may feel a slight sting.
Like I said, it's near an optimum. This is just a coffee stir. I did a dry run of BBs and got 190 grams in. Is that a lot? Yes and no. It's not very much, but it's a lot to add to the handle. And the web of epoxy and BB will help strengthen it up and, like I said, hopefully reduce some uncomfortable vibrations. And no, a funnel doesn't work. There's just something about a funnel and little spheres. I want to heat up both things. I want my BBs nice and warm, and I want to heat this up just to ensure a good bond. But in this case, it's not so important with the handle because once all the BBs fuse together, it really is never going to come out of there anyways. No matter what, it doesn't hurt to heat up the BBs. If they're pretty warm to the touch, it will still help the epoxy thin and flow nicer. For comparison, this is a full tube, and this is how much I'm going to use at first Did I mention that this is silicone? If you do it with anything else, the container will be ruined. It's every bit as fun as I remembered. You have to try this out. There's something that's just satisfying about it. I also like how it naturally wants to make that hexagonal arrangement. You can see it in the back of the cup. I have every intention of applying this to some other projects, but I just haven't had time. I've been moving and I've been so busy. But if you have any good ideas for this process, let me know. I'd be interested to hear them. I mean, aside from filling up a junk axe handle or making epoxy or hand-shaped bookends. Oh, I didn't fit it all in this time. I guess it just doesn't settle as well when it's sticky. And now we wait. This substance is ground up car tire. How I got this and why I have it is the subject of a story for a different day, but for our purposes here today, you could probably just grab an old tire or an old chunk of rubber and carve off some pieces with a knife. Admittedly, toluene is one of my least favorite chemicals to work with. You might be familiar with it because it's the solvent that's in Plasti Dip. But it works great for removing spray adhesive for one, and for two, softening rubber. It tends to attack rubber. So in the case of a mysterious handle like this, I suspect that it softens the rubber enough to prepare it to make an active bond for the epoxy rubber that I'm going to use. And I suspect that my suspicion was correct because you saw how tough it was to remove in the beginning. So I'll just make a few dabs here where my new handle is going to come in contact with the old. And then I'll quickly throw this away, not breathe any in, and go wash my hands. So now we're back to the old tape and toothpick method, which is much easier. And you can do this in as many sessions as you want. We'll apply just a big glob of epoxy first. I'm mixing it thoroughly, and again I'm using the heat gun to control the viscosity of the epoxy. If you make it too hot, it will become too runny. And now I wait again. So the epoxy will have to set for, I don't know, I'll give it 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'll just repeat the process. I'll check this, and when the toothpick is too difficult to move, then you know you're ready to do it. And while we're waiting, I'll take the opportunity to express this thought. To those of you that would say, dude, just buy a new one, or you have way too much time on your hands, you might be missing the point a little bit. A lot of the techniques that I demonstrate on these videos are things that are out-of-the-box solutions that you can apply laterally to other problems that you might have to solve. You don't necessarily have to do this to your axe handle, but maybe it will jar loose an idea for you that will be beneficial at some other point in your life. So, judge not, alright? Thanks. Okay, ready for session 2? Let's start by getting rid of some of the excess. You don't have to be bashful. You want to be liberal because we're going to be removing some of the material later. Once it's hard, I'll sand what I don't want off. If it sags, I might have to use gravity to help move it around, but it looks pretty stable. Okay, it's fully cured, and I've given it about, I don't know, 3 or 4 sessions. So let's go sand it and give it a proper shape, and then I'll share my conclusions with you. Oh, one thing I want to mention though. The shredded stuff, the thicker stuff didn't seem to work as well. I think that it was more dense when I used the finer powder. So if you want to try to duplicate this, maybe you could set up a belt sander or something and try to collect the rubber. At the moment, I don't have an old chunk of rubber to practice on, but on my disc sander sometimes a fine powder will collect underneath here. I think if you did it with an old chunk of tire or something, that you might be able to get enough powder this way. Definitely a cool process. In closing, this is the part where I tell you how great this is and how you have to do this, because that's my function as a YouTube presenter. But I have to be honest with you, I don't think it's a great idea. The BBs kind of gave it too much weight, believe it or not. I would want probably half as much weight added to it, but I don't know. I have to use this for a season and then decide how I feel. I might probably, if I were to do it again, just press a piece of wood down into the shaft and that would be sufficient. But this part of the process I really recommend. I think that turns out great. It has a really nice rubbery feel that's hard and durable and really approximates typical Estwing-esque handle. In fact, I'm considering doing it on this, but I don't like there to be too much of a back end on it because it becomes dangerous. It can cause, well, this. If you miss, especially for people who choke up on their hammer, if you miss, it can propel the hammer forward, and that can be especially dangerous with something like this. So, another reason is because too much of this keeps it from going into your hammer loop easily. Now all that's left is to give it an edge, and I'll use this. Yeah, my chamfer. Normally you're used to seeing my chamfer sanding machine, but I also have a flat attachment for it. What do you think I am, a savage? I guess this is the part where you really start to invest labor into this. I don't know how much work I'll put into it, but my idea is to remove some of the material from this direction, just to thin the head down a little bit here, to get a better, thinner taper. And then finally I'll put this little edge on. But this video's been long enough, and you can find axe sharpening videos elsewhere. So, see you next time. yeah, you'll definitely want to try this project out. I'll put a little link right here. I hope you got a kick out of this, and I hope you join me for a different video.